Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 981B, and today's date is May 26, 2016, and the title of the episode is, It Begins, Countries Are Now Closing Surrounding Airspace Around Libya. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, out in the South China Sea, we see the U.S. with all the other countries that are in the South China Sea. And of course, the U.S. is pushing the Philippines and now Vietnam, Australia, Japan to complain about the Spratly Islands, the islands that China says is theirs. And if we go back to 1947, they drew maps at that point in time after World War II because most of the countries around that area said, listen, we don't care if you take these islands or take this type of area, you can have them. It's not a big deal. And the U.S. is out there right now, after all these years, saying that, no, this does not belong to China, and they're continually sailing warships, flying planes in this area to provoke China. But we have to look back in history, and we see that the U.S. has done the same thing as China, but in a different way. China, after World War II, they drew out the maps and they showed that this is part of China. The other countries didn't care. And for many, many years, this is how it was. The U.S., on the other hand, decided to go and stake claims of different islands which were already claimed by other nations. And according to declassified CIA documents, President Woodrow Wilson, using the Guano Act as cover, laid claim to Sarana, Racador in the Western Caribbean, and they built U.S. lighthouses on these islands, saying that now they're part of the U.S. And the United States continued occupying many different islands. Wake, Kingman, Midway, Johnston, Howland, Jarvis Islands, and that was all based on nothing. It's funny when you really look back in history and you really look at what's going on here, you see that the U.S. has done everything that they're telling the world that China shouldn't be doing. Seems a little hypocritical, doesn't it? Now, there is a retired or a former U.S. Forces Korea commander, and he is out there saying that North Korea, they could collapse any time, and we should expect North Korea to collapse. He went on to say that, first off, I believe there will be a strong provocation, strong attacks by North Korea that could quickly escalate into a much bigger conflict. And this is coming from retired four-star General Walter Sharp. Secondly, there will be an instability in North Korea that I believe will lead to the collapse of North Korea and much sooner than many of us think. He also said that it is becoming increasingly clear that the status quo in North Korea, that is not sustainable. And there are expected changes, including sudden regime collapse or a coup coming up very soon. Now, we know what the U.S. does. We know that the U.S. initiates these regime changes. And we can see right now there might be something in the works where they're looking to remove that government and place a different government in there. Or there could be something else going on altogether where maybe they're ready to push some type of armed conflict with North Korea. And this is a situation that we need to watch very, very closely. Out in Estonia, the Prime Minister has called for one NATO battalion to be permanently stationed in the Baltic nations instead of having rotations. And he's saying that this would help Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania to protect themselves from, of course, Russian aggression. And we see right now that a lot of military assets are being moved all over the place. And troops are being rotated in and out. Because what they're doing is they're preparing for what is coming. And they're hoping by doing all of this, this would provoke Russia maybe into doing something. And they want them to build up arms on the other side. Because this way they can point in the corporate media saying, look, they're building up armed forces. But of course it's inside their country. The U.S. and NATO, they're building up arms right outside the border of Russia. Listen, if Russia or China was doing this in Canada or in Mexico, right up against the border of the United States government would be a little concerned about that. And this is why Russia is very concerned. We see out in the Mediterranean, something weird is happening there. 3 countries right now in the Mediterranean have closed their airspace and territories for aircraft departing from Libya. Now, the exceptions are very few and involve transport of military and evacuees. And what we're seeing right now is they might be getting ready and prepared for some type of an offensive in there. Now, we see Greece, Malta, and Italy. And I wouldn't be surprised if more of these countries decide to close the airspace so they don't have air traffic going in and out. And this way they can bring in the bombers, they can bring in whatever they need to go into Libya. Now, the closures, they're starting today or yesterday, and they're going into August. Now remember, there are a couple drills going on. We have Phoenix 2016, which ends May 27th. But right after that, we have 2 NATO refueling exercises, which will take place in this area. And this is going to go from the end of May to June, July. And then there's another one right after that. So this is a very interesting thing that's happening right now. And we know that Congress leaves in August. We know Obama has Washington all to himself. We know from past history, this is when they like to push some type of event, offensive, military exercise, because we've seen it in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised at this point right now that this is what they've been preparing for, and everything is getting ready. We're at the end of May right now, we're going into June, and we're getting closer and closer to that point. Now we see out in Syria, Russia has destroyed the Islamic State headquarters in northern Palmyra, and there's a battle going on in Palmyra, in Aleppo, in Raqqa, and the U.S. is not coordinating any of this with Russia whatsoever. They don't even want to be involved because we know what's happening. And we know that al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, the Islamic State, there are U.S. forces intertwined in these groups because these are the proxy forces of the United States and the coalition forces. And they're not going after these forces. They're going after the infrastructure. They're going after Assad troops. They're going after everything but what they say they're going after. We see the Syrian opposition. They have repeatedly struck a hospital with rockets. And they know this area is filled with civilians, but again, they don't care. Remember, these are paid mercenaries. These are terrorists. They don't care about the people in the country. Now, the Syrian opposition, they want Germany to join the peace talks. They're feeling that if Germany was there, they can speak to Russia, they can have Assad removed, and everything will be okay. Well, right now, there are no Syria talks for about 2 to 3 weeks right now. This is coming from the UN. So, there's nothing scheduled at this point. We see a UK general. He is out there, and he is saying that al-Qaeda linked extremists are much more dangerous now than the Islamic State. Well, the Islamic State is being wiped out by Russia. A lot of these terrorists are being moved over to al-Qaeda, back into al-Nusra, back into the moderate rebels, and they're building up forces of al-Qaeda and the other terrorist groups. And Lieutenant General Mark Carlton Smith is saying that the al-Nusra Front is the strongest remaining al-Qaeda franchise. And he's very worried because there could be some type of attacks happening in the West by this group. Now, what's happening here is they're losing the edge with the Islamic State. So now they're switching over to al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, to show that, okay, now they're the strongest group. Now they're taking over in Syria. They're creating a caliphate just like the Islamic State. Because you have to remember, Russia has drawn down the forces from 80,000 all the way down to like 51,000 and counting. And it's shrinking, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're on the run. And they're losing their advantage. And this is why the U.S. is bringing in special op teams. This is why they're bringing in al-Qaeda. This is why they're bringing in other terrorist groups to morph them into the moderate rebels, back into al-Qaeda, so Russia doesn't go after them. Because what they're really preparing for is something major in August. We can see all the signs. We see they're bringing in more and more military assets. We see al-Qaeda. There's about 6,000 troops near Aleppo now. We see air bases being built in all these countries. Over the Mediterranean, 3 countries are already closing their airspace to Libya. So we're starting to see signs that more and more of this is occurring as we get closer and closer to August, which shows us that something big is about to happen in the Middle East. Now, they might start different parts of it at different times. Maybe this weekend we might see something happen in Libya. Going down the line as they're preparing for Syria, that might happen in August. But we know at this point, from all the indicators, from everything that we've been looking at, they're getting prepared and ready to light up the Middle East. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.